7 riders, torches burning in the darkness. The first bullet tore through his shoulder. He went down hard. Then she was there, the woman he'd married 3 weeks ago, standing over him with a shotgun aimed at the shadows. "Next one's center mass," she said. Her voice didn't waver. "This is the story of a man who was warned to never help her, and helped her anyway." Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from right now? I love seeing how far these stories travel. It all started on a cold March morning in 1942, when a black sedan rolled up to Tom Mitchell's ranch carrying a warning he should have listened to. March 1942, Ridgway, Colorado. The wind came down from the mountains with teeth in it, rattling the loose boards on the barn and carrying the smell of snow that hadn't fallen yet. Thomas Mitchell stood at the fence line, hammer in one hand, wire cutters in the other, squinting against the dust that rose from the dry earth. He was 39 years old, built like a man who'd spent his life working with his hands, and he moved with the careful economy of someone who knew how to make every motion count. The fence post leaned at an angle that would bother him all winter if he didn't fix it now. He set down the tools, braced his shoulder against the weathered wood, and pushed until it straightened. The wire sang tight. He was reaching for the hammer when he heard the engine. Tom stopped, listened. The sound was wrong for this place. Too smooth, too expensive. Not the rattle of a farm truck or the wheeze of old Pete's pickup. This was something that belonged in the city, rolling down paved streets, not kicking up dust on a ranch road 3 miles from town. His hand moved to the Colt 45 tucked inside his jacket. Old habit. The kind that had kept him alive when other men hadn't been so careful. The car came into view. Black sedan dust coating the chrome but not hiding the fact that it was new, maybe a 41 Ford. It slowed as it approached, tires crunching on gravel, and stopped 20 feet from where Tom stood. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He wore a suit that cost more than most people in Ridgway made in a month, and his boots had the kind of shine that said he'd never walked through anything worse than a hotel lobby. He was maybe 40, with the kind of soft face that came from never having to fight for anything. Tom didn't move, just watched, hands still near the gun. The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Mitchell." Tom said nothing. "My name's not important." The man pulled a cigarette case from his jacket, selected one with careful fingers. "I'm here on behalf of someone who wanted me to deliver a message." "I'm listening." The man lit the cigarette, took a drag, exhaled slowly, taking his time, enjoying it. "Frank Dalton sends his regards." The name hit Tom like a fist to the chest, but he didn't let it show. Years of practice, years of keeping his face blank when everything inside him was screaming. Frank Dalton, the man Tom had put in prison 2 years ago. The man who'd sworn as they dragged him out of the courtroom that he'd find Tom and make him pay for every second he spent behind bars. The man who apparently was out. Tom's voice stayed level. "What does Dalton want?" "Nothing much, just wanted you to know he's thinking about you, remembering all the good times you had together." The man gestured at the ranch that behind the fields stretching toward the mountains. "Nice place you got here. Be a shame if anything happened to it." That a threat? Just an observation. The man dropped his cigarette, ground it under his expensive boot. "Mr. Dalton's a free man now." Turns out the evidence against him wasn't as solid as certain people thought. Funny how these things work out. Tom felt cold settle in his gut. Dalton was out, which meant every precaution Tom had taken, every careful step to disappear and start over, had been for nothing. "You deliver your message," Tom said. "Now get off my land." The man smiled again, started to turn toward his car, then stopped, like he'd just remembered something. "Oh, one more thing. You had anyone come around lately, woman? Maybe name of Margaret Warren." Tom's hand tightened on the fence post. "Why?" "No reason. Just if she does show up, might want to think twice about helping her. She's the kind of trouble nobody needs." The man opened his car door. "You take care now, Mr. Mitchell, and remember what I said about this nice place you got." The sedan pulled away, leaving a trail of dust that hung in the still air. Tom stood there for a long time after the sound of the engine faded. His mind was racing, sorting through possibilities, threats, angles. Frank Dalton knew where he was. That was bad enough. But why the warning about a woman Tom had never heard of? What did Margaret Warren have to do with any of this? He looked down at his hand. It was shaking. He made a fist, forced it steady. 2 years. 2 years of peace or something close to it. 2 years of trying to be just a rancher, just a man who worked his land and kept to himself. And now it was over. He picked up the hammer, drove 3 nails into the fence post with precise, controlled strikes. Then he walked back to the house, went inside, and opened the gun safe he kept in the back bedroom. 2 rifles, a shotgun, the Colt, and a Winchester 30-06 he'd carried as a U.S. Marshal. He checked them all one by one, made sure they were clean and loaded. Then he sat at the kitchen table and waited for whatever was coming next. It came 2 hours later, but not in the form he expected. Tom was in town loading supplies into the back of his truck. Wire, nails, ammunition. More ammunition than usual. Old Hutchins, who ran the general store, noticed. Expecting trouble, Tom. Just being prepared. Prepared for what? Tom didn't answer. He paid, carried the boxes outside, and was stacking them in the truck bed when he saw her. A woman stood outside the church across the street, thin, worn down by something more than just hard work. She had 4 children with her. The oldest looked maybe 9, standing close to his mother like he was trying to protect her. The youngest was just a baby, maybe 18 months, on her hip. The other 2, a boy and a girl, clung to her skirt. Tom watched as Reverend Parker came to the church door. The woman spoke to him. Tom couldn't hear the words, but he could see the Reverend's face, sympathetic but firm, shaking his head. The door closed. The woman stood there for a moment. Her shoulders didn't slump. She didn't cry. She just turned and started walking, the children following like shadows. Tom loaded the last box, told himself it wasn't his business. He had enough problems. Dalton, the warning, the guns in his safe, and the knowledge that his quiet life was about to explode. But the oldest boy waved at him. Just a small gesture, barely lifting his hand, but it was there. A child's instinct to be friendly even when everything was falling apart. Tom saw his brother in that wave. James, who died when he was 15, crushed under a tractor on the old family farm. James, who used to wave at strangers on the road, who saw the good in everyone until the day the good ran out and left him dead in the dirt. Tom closed the truck gate, walked across the street. The woman turned when she heard his boots on the wooden sidewalk. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd thought, maybe 30. Her cheekbones stood out sharp under skin that hadn't seen enough food in a long time. But her eyes were steady, no begging in them, no desperation, just a fierce, stubborn determination to keep standing. "Ma'am," Tom said, "you need something." She studied him for a moment, measuring, deciding if he was safe. "I'm looking for work, sir." "What's your name?" A small hesitation. Then Margaret Warren. Tom felt the world tilt sideways. This was the woman. The one Dalton's man had warned him about just this morning. The one who was supposedly trouble. He looked at her, at the children, at the baby who was starting to fuss from hunger. This didn't look like a setup. Nobody could fake the hollowness in those kids' eyes, the way they pressed against their mother, like she was the only solid thing in a world that had gone liquid and dangerous. But the timing, Jesus, the timing. "Where are you from, Mrs. Warren?" "Kansas, Topeka." "That's a long way. You come here alone?" "Yes, sir." "Your husband?" Her jaw tightened. "He left." Tom nodded slowly, processing, trying to figure out if this was coincidence or something worse. Dalton's man had warned him about her less than 2 hours ago. And now here she was, like she'd been scripted into his life. But if she was working for Dalton, she was the best actress he'd ever seen. And Dalton wouldn't use kids. The man was a killer, a criminal, a piece of work who'd murdered 2 federal agents and laughed about it, but he had a code. Twisted as it was, it existed. Kids were off limits, which meant either this was the worst timing in history or Margaret Warren was running from the same man who was hunting Tom. "I got a ranch," Tom heard himself say. "Few miles west. Could use help. You know anything about ranch work?" Her chin came up. "I can cook for 20 people and not waste a scrap. I can birth calves, mend fences, shoot straight if needed. I can read, write, teach children their numbers, and I can work 16 hours without complaining." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Shoot straight? My father taught me, before he died." "Interesting. Most women didn't lead with that particular skill. You got anywhere else to go?" "No, sir." "Then get in the truck. All of you. She didn't hesitate, didn't ask about pay or living arrangements or what exactly he expected. She just gathered the children, lifted the baby higher on her hip, and walked to the truck. The kids climbed into the bed. She got in the cab, the baby on her lap. Tom walked around to the driver's side, looked back at the town, saw curtains twitching in windows, people watching, judging. Tomorrow the gossip would start. Tom Mitchell, the hermit rancher, picking up a desperate woman with 4 kids. People would talk, they'd speculate, they'd make it into something dirty. He didn't care. He got in, started the engine, and drove. They didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. Tom kept checking the rear view mirror, old habit, making sure nobody was following. The road stayed empty behind them. Margaret sat rigid in her seat, one hand on the baby's back, the other gripping the edge of the bench, like she was ready to jump if she needed to. Like she'd done this before, trusted the wrong person, paid the price. Tom broke the silence. You know anything about me before you got in this truck? She turned to look at him, surprised by the question. No, sir, I didn't even know your name until just now. And you got in anyway. I ran out of choices. Honest answer. Tom believed her, which meant she didn't know who he was, didn't know about the badge he used to carry the men he'd put in prison, the price on his head that Frank Dalton had already set. He wanted to ask her why Dalton cared about her, what she'd done, what she'd seen, what made her worth warning about. But not yet. First, he needed to see if she could be trusted, if this was real or some elaborate trap. The oldest boy spoke up from the truck bed, his voice carrying through the open rear window. Sir, you a farmer? Tom glanced in the mirror. The kid had his mother's eyes. Serious old beyond his years. Rancher. I raise cattle. You got horses? 3 of them. The younger boy, maybe 7, leaned forward. Do they got names? Tom felt the corner of his mouth lift. First time he'd almost smiled in longer than he could remember. Copper, Dusty, and Whiskey. The boy laughed. A horse named Whiskey. He's brave like a drunk man. That's why I call him that. Margaret was watching him now. He could feel her gaze measuring him all over again, trying to figure out what kind of man picks up strangers and brings them home. Why are you helping us? She asked quietly. Tom kept his eyes on the road. The mountains were closer now, their peaks sharp against the pale sky. Your boy waved at me, reminded me of my brother. He died when he was young. She nodded, didn't push for more. And I saw too many good people not get help when they needed it. Didn't want to add another time to that list. Thank you. Tom didn't respond, just drove. The ranch came into view as they crested a rise. Main house on the left, 2 stories, weathered but solid. Barn to the right, bigger than the house, with a hayloft and a peaked roof. Bunkhouse beyond that, smaller, but it had a stove and 2 rooms. Corrals, chicken coop, root cellar. 340 acres stretching back toward the foothills, half of it pasture, the rest scrub and rocks. It wasn't much, but it was his. The only place he'd ever owned, the only thing that was truly Tom Mitchell's, and not part of the lie he'd been living before. He pulled the truck to a stop near the bunkhouse. That's where you'll stay. 2 rooms, kitchen, space, potbelly stove. It's not fancy, but it's dry and warm. Margaret climbed out, still holding the baby. The other children jumped from the truck bed, staring around with wide eyes. Tom walked to the bunkhouse, unlocked the door, pushed it open. Dust motes floated in the shaft of sunlight that cut through the dim interior. A table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in each room. Basic. There's a water pump out back, Tom said. Outhouse past the chicken coop. I'll bring food over in a bit. What do you want me to do? Margaret asked. For work. Tom looked at her, at the exhaustion in her face, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow we start. He turned to go, then stopped. One more thing, the most important thing. Mrs. Warren, I need you to understand something. If you see strangers coming, men you don't know, especially men in suits or riding horses you don't recognize, you take the children inside, lock the door, and grab the shotgun. I'm going to leave you. If they try to come in, you shoot. Understand? Her face had gone pale. Are you expecting trouble? Tom met her eyes. I'm always expecting trouble. That's how I stay alive. He walked back to the main house, feeling her gaze on his back. Went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and waited. An hour later, Pete Garrison rode up on his roan mare. Pete was 63, white-haired, tough as boot leather. He'd been Tom's deputy back when Tom wore the marshal's badge, and he'd followed him to Colorado when everything went to hell. Tom poured 2 cups of coffee, handed one to Pete. "Heard you got yourself some help," Pete said. "News travels fast." "Small town. Woman with 4 kids shows up, you take her home, people notice." Pete sipped his coffee. "She the one, Margaret Warren?" "Yeah." "Dalton's man warned you about her this morning, and she shows up this afternoon. That's one hell of a coincidence." "I know." "You think she's working for him?" Tom shook his head. "Those kids are real. The hunger's real. She's running from something, but I don't think she knows about me." "Then why'd Dalton's man mention her?" "That's what I need to find out." Tom set down his cup. "I need you to go to Denver, dig into her background. And Richard Warren, the husband who left. Find out what connects them to Dalton." Pete nodded slowly. "And if she's dangerous?" Tom looked out the window toward the bunkhouse. Smoke was starting to rise from the stovepipe. Margaret had got the fire going. The children were visible through the window, moving around inside. "Then I'll deal with it. But those kids don't deserve what's coming if she's part of this. They get protected regardless." Pete stood, drained his coffee. "You're playing a dangerous game, Tom." "I've been playing it for 2 years. Might as well see it through." After Pete left, Tom walked back to the bunkhouse, knocked on the door. Margaret opened it, the baby asleep on her shoulder. "I brought you some things." Tom handed her a basket. "Eggs, bacon, milk, bread, coffee. Enough for a few days." She took it, her throat working. "I'll pay you back when I get wages." "No need." "Yes, there is. I don't take charity." Tom nodded, respected that. "Fair enough." He started to turn away, then stopped. "Mrs. Warren, one more thing. That shotgun I mentioned, it's in the corner by the stove now. It's loaded. You know how to use one?" "Yes." "Good. Keep it close." He left her there, walked back to his house, and sat on the porch as the sun went down. The mountains turned purple, then black. Stars came out sharp and cold. Somewhere out there, Frank Dalton was planning his next move. Somewhere, Richard Warren was looking for his wife. And somewhere, the truth was waiting to come out and tear everything apart. Tom lit a cigarette, watched the smoke drift away on the wind, and thought about all the choices that had led him here. The badge he'd worn with pride. The men he'd arrested, the ones he'd killed, when they didn't give him a choice. The trial where he'd testified against Frank Dalton, watching the man's face twist with rage as the judge handed down the sentence. He'd thought prison would hold Dalton, that the law would keep working, that justice would stick. But money talked louder than justice, and Dalton had plenty of money. Enough to buy lawyers, judges, anyone who needed buying. So now Dalton was out. And Tom was here on a ranch in the middle of nowhere with a woman and 4 children who'd walked into his life at exactly the wrong time. Or maybe exactly the right time. He stubbed out the cigarette, went inside and checked the guns one more time. Then he sat in the dark, listening to the night sounds, the cattle lowing in the distance, the wind rattling the shutters. Morning would come. Work would need doing. And somewhere in the middle of fences and cattle and the simple rhythm of ranch life, he'd figure out what Margaret Warren was hiding and why Frank Dalton wanted her dead. The sun came up cold and bright. Tom was already in the barn when he heard footsteps outside. He turned the rifle in hand, then lowered it when he saw Margaret. She stood in the doorway, dressed in the same worn clothes from yesterday, hair pulled back with a piece of string. "Tell me where to start," she said. Tom looked at her. Most people would have slept till 6, 7, taken the rest they had been offered. It was barely past 4:30. "You know horses, not much. Cattle, less. Then we start with chickens." He showed her how to rake out the coop, how to hold the feed bucket so the birds didn't swarm. She listened, watched his hands, didn't ask questions she didn't need answered. Smart, efficient. They worked side by side as the sun climbed higher. Tom noticed things. The way she didn't flinch from the work, no matter how dirty or hard. The way she moved with a kind of controlled strength, like someone who'd been doing manual labor her whole life. The scars on her hands, old burns, and cuts the kind you got from a lifetime of cooking over hot stoves and working with sharp tools. This wasn't a woman who'd been pampered. This was someone who knew what survival looked like. Around noon, they stopped for water, stood by the pump drinking from tin cups. Margaret's face was flushed from the work, sweat darkening her collar. You did ranch work before, Tom said. Not a question. My father had a farm, Nebraska. Thought you said Kansas. She tensed. Barely, but Tom caught it. I moved to Kansas after he died, married Richard there. Tom filed that away. The hesitation, the change in her story. She was hiding something. The question was whether it mattered. The oldest boy, Samuel, appeared from the bunkhouse. He approached carefully the way you'd approach a strange dog. Sir, can I help with anything? Tom studied him, 9 years old, trying to be a man, trying to protect his mother the only way he knew how. You know how to brush a horse? No, sir, but I can learn. Tom led him to the stable, showed him how to hold the brush, how to work with the grain of the coat, how to talk soft so the animal stayed calm. Samuel listened with fierce concentration, like every word was a treasure he needed to remember. Copper, the gentlest of the 3 horses, stood patient under the boy's uncertain hands. You're doing good, Tom said. I want to help Ma. She works too hard. How long's your father been gone? Samuel's jaw tightened. Since December, right after Christmas. He left in the middle of the night, took the truck and all the money. He say why? No, sir. Just gone when we woke up. Tom felt something shift in his chest, anger maybe, or recognition. He knew what it was like to have the ground drop out from under you, to wake up one day and find everything you thought was solid had turned to smoke. You're a good boy, Samuel. Your ma's lucky to have you. The boy's eyes shone, but he didn't cry. Just went back to brushing, putting everything he had into making that horse's coat shine. That evening, after the work was done and the sun was sliding toward the mountains, Tom found Margaret hanging laundry on a line she'd rigged between 2 posts. The children played nearby the first time he'd heard them laugh. You settling in all right? He asked. Yes, sir. Thank you for the food and the work. You earned it. She pinned another shirt, not looking at him. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why did you warn me about strangers? What kind of trouble are you expecting? Tom leaned against the fence post, trying to decide how much to tell her. Too much and he'd scare her off. Too little and she wouldn't be ready when it came. I used to be a U.S. Marshal, he said finally. Put some bad men in prison. One of them got out recently. He's the type who holds grudges. Margaret's hands stilled on the clothesline. He knows you're here. As of yesterday, yeah. And you think he'll come? I know he will. She turned to face him. Then why did you bring us here? You're putting my children in danger. They were already in danger. At least here they got walls and a roof and someone who knows how to fight back. I don't understand. Tom met her eyes. The man who came to warn me about Frank Dalton also warned me about you. Said if you showed up, I shouldn't help you. Said you were trouble. Margaret went white, stumbled back a step. But I helped you anyway, Tom continued, because I figure anyone Dalton wants me to stay away from is probably someone who needs protection from him. So here's what I need to know, Mrs. Warren. Why does Frank Dalton care about you? She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at her children, then back at Tom. I don't know anyone named Frank Dalton. It was a lie. Tom heard it in her voice, saw it in the way her shoulders tensed. Mrs. Warren, he said quietly, I can't protect you if I don't know what I'm protecting you from. You don't need to protect me. I'll leave tomorrow. We'll go somewhere else. Where you got money, you got anywhere safe to run to. Silence. I didn't think so. Tom pushed off from the fence. I'm not asking you to trust me yet. You don't know me well enough for that. But I am asking you to think about your kids, about what happens to them if you run and whoever's chasing you catches up. He walked back toward the house, leaving her standing there with wet clothes in her hands and fear in her eyes. That night, Tom sat on his porch with his rifle across his knees. The bunkhouse was dark smoke, no longer rising from the chimney. Margaret and her children were asleep or trying to be. Pete would be in Denver by now, asking questions, digging through records. In a few days, Tom would know the truth about Margaret Warren and her husband and whatever had sent them running. But a few days might be too long. If Dalton was moving, he wouldn't wait. He'd strike fast before Tom could prepare, before help could arrive. Tom checked the rifle again, counted the ammunition in his pockets, looked out at the dark shapes of the barn and the corrals and the fence line stretching away into the night. This was his land. He'd bought it with money earned honestly, built it with his own hands. It was supposed to be the place where he finally stopped running, finally had something that was his. And now it was about to become a battlefield. He heard a sound, footsteps on gravel. His hand went to the rifle finger, finding the trigger. Margaret stepped into the light from the porch. She wore a coat over her nightdress, her feet bare. "Couldn't sleep," she said. Tom lowered the rifle. Understandable. She sat on the porch steps, not close to him, but not far either. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "I saw something last December. In Topeka." Tom waited. "Richard came home late. I heard voices in the garage. Men arguing. I went to see if everything was all right." Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "There were 3 men, Richard and 2 others. They were talking about money, about shipments. I heard them say a name, Frank Dalton." Tom's blood went cold. "They saw me," Margaret continued. "The argument got worse. Guns came out. 2 men died, right there in my garage. Blood everywhere. And Richard looked at me and said, if I told anyone, if I went to the police, he'd kill me and the children. Said he'd make sure they never found the bodies." "So you ran?" "I took the kids that night, got on a train. Didn't stop until I ran out of money." She looked up at him. "I didn't know he worked for Frank Dalton. I didn't know what I'd walked into. I just knew I had to get my children away from there." Tom processed this. Margaret Warren was a witness to a murder committed by Dalton's men, which meant Dalton wanted her dead before she could testify. And Richard, her husband, was one of Dalton's enforcers. "Does Richard know where you are?" "I don't think so. I was careful, didn't tell anyone where I was going." "He'll find you eventually. Men like Dalton have resources. They'll check train records, ask questions in every town between Kansas and here." "Then I'll run again." "Where how far you think you'll get with 4 kids and no money?" Margaret stood up, anger flashing in her eyes. "Then what do you suggest, Mr. Mitchell, that I just wait here for them to come kill me?" "No," Tom said. "I suggest we kill them first." She stared at him. "You're a witness to murder," Tom continued. "That makes you valuable, not just to Dalton, but to the law. If we can keep you alive long enough to testify, we can put Dalton back in prison, this time for good. And how do we stay alive that long?" Tom walked to the edge of the porch. The night was quiet except for the wind and the distant sound of cattle. "We make this place a fortress. We prepare. And when they come, we make them pay for every inch of ground. You'd do that for me, for people you just met." Tom looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd walked into his life at the worst possible time, bringing danger and complications and 4 children who didn't deserve any of this. "I spent 2 years hiding," he said. 2 years being afraid, acting like if I just kept my head down, Dalton would forget about me. But he didn't forget. He never was going to. So I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid. If Dalton wants a war, he can have one. And at least this time, I'll have something worth fighting for." Margaret's eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. "Why, you don't even know us." "I know enough. I know you're brave. I know you protected your kids when no one else would. I know you're still standing when most people would have broken." He paused. "And I know that for the first time in 2 years, I got a reason to wake up that isn't just surviving until tomorrow." She took a step toward him, stopped. "Mr. Mitchell." "Tom, call me Tom." "Tom," she said, "if we do this, if we fight, I need to know something. Do you think we can win?" Tom thought about Frank Dalton, about the men he'd send, the resources he'd use, the fact that he'd already beaten the justice system once and would think he was untouchable. But he also thought about this ranch, about the high ground and the clear sight lines, about Pete Garrison, who could shoot like the devil and was loyal unto death, about Margaret Warren, who could apparently handle a shotgun and had more steel in her spine than most men Tom had known. "Yeah," he said. "I think we got a chance." Margaret nodded slowly. Then she held out her hand. Tom took it. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused from work. "Then I'm with you," she said. "We fight together." They stood there on the porch, 2 people who'd found each other through circumstance and desperation, making a promise neither was sure they could keep. Behind them, the mountains stood black against the stars. Ahead of them, the road stretched empty and dark. But somewhere out there, Frank Dalton was coming. And when he arrived, he'd find out that Tom Mitchell wasn't the man he'd been 2 years ago. That man had run. That man had been afraid. This man was done running. This man had something to protect. and he'd burn the whole world down before he let Dalton take it away. The days that followed took on a rhythm that felt almost normal if you didn't look too close at the guns Tom kept within arm's reach, or the way he checked the horizon every time a horse whinnied. Margaret rose before dawn every morning, had coffee made by the time Tom came down from the main house. They'd stand together in the cold pre-dawn air, breath misting, planning the day's work in quiet voices while the children still slept. She learned fast. By the end of the first week, she could mix feed without measuring, knew which cows were close to calving just by looking at them, could tell when a fence line was about to give way before it actually did. Tom watched her work and saw someone who'd been doing hard labor her whole life, someone who understood that survival meant paying attention to details other people missed. On the third day, one of the cows got tangled in barbed wire near the creek. Deep gashes across her flank, blood soaking into the mud. Tom went to get her free, called for Margaret to help. She didn't hesitate, waded right into the cold water, grabbed the cow's head, held it steady while Tom cut away the wire and cleaned the wounds. The animal kicked, thrashed near, crushed Margaret against the creek bank. She didn't let go. When it was done and the cow was free, limping, but alive, Tom looked at Margaret. Her dress was soaked blood on her hands and arms, mud in her hair. "Not many women could do what you just did," he said. Margaret wiped her hands on her already ruined dress. "I've done harder things, Tom." "Like what?" She met his eyes. "Survived." That night, Tom was cleaning the rifles on his kitchen table when he heard hoofbeats. He was at the window with the Winchester before the rider came into view. Pete Garrison, back from Denver. Tom met him at the barn where they could talk without being overheard. Pete looked tired, older than his 63 years, with the kind of exhaustion that came from learning things you wished you hadn't. "Tell me," Tom said. Pete swung down from his horse, pulled a flask from his saddlebag, took a long drink before handing it to Tom. "Richard Warren works for Union Pacific Railroad. That's the cover story. Reality is he's an enforcer. Collections, intimidation, the occasional murder when someone needs disappearing." Tom took a drink, felt the whiskey burn down his throat. For Dalton's organization, yeah, Dalton runs a smuggling ring out of Kansas City. Cigarettes, liquor, guns. Been operating since '39, even while he was in prison. Richard Warren's been with him for 2 years. "What about Margaret?" Pete pulled out a folded newspaper clipping, handed it to Tom. "December 15th, 1941. 2 men killed in a shootout in Topeka. Police suspected gang activity, but had no witnesses. The bodies were identified as Carl Jensen and Bobby Morrow, both known associates of Frank Dalton." Tom read the article by lamplight. "Says here police wanted to question a woman who was seen at the scene. Margaret Warren, they never found her. She vanished that same night with our 4 kids. Police figured she was scared, went into hiding." "She was. Still is." Pete leaned against the barn wall. "Tom, this gets worse. I talked to a contact I still got in the Denver Marshal's office. Turns out Frank Dalton's been looking for Margaret Warren since the day he got out of prison. Put the word out to every rat and snitch from here to the Mississippi. He's offering $500 to anyone who can tell him where she is." $500. More money than most people in these parts saw in a year. Enough to make good people think bad thoughts, enough to turn neighbors into informants. "Dalton thinks she can identify Mom," Tom said slowly. "She saw Richard kill those men. Maybe she heard them talking about Dalton planning jobs. She's a witness who can put Dalton away for conspiracy to murder." "Exactly. And Richard Warren is Dalton's cleanup crew. His job is to find his wife and make sure she never testifies." Tom folded the newspaper clipping, put it in his pocket, looked out through the barn door toward the bunkhouse where lamplight glowed in the windows. "So Margaret shows up here the same day Dalton's man warns me about her. That's not coincidence." "No," Pete agreed. "Dalton knows you're here. He knows she's here, or at least suspects it. He's playing with you, Tom, letting you know he's coming." "Then we get ready." Pete studied him. "You sure about this? You could put her on a train tonight, send her west, tell her to disappear in California or Oregon, walk away clean. And how long before Dalton finds her again? How long before those kids end up in a ditch somewhere?" Tom shook his head. "No, this ends here. Might end with you dead. Might, but at least it'll be for something that matters." Pete sighed, pulled out a cigarette, lit it with steady hands. "All right, then we do this smart. First thing, you need to tell her the truth. All of it. She's got a right to know what she's walked into. I will. Second, we fortify this place. String wire set up sight lines, prepare escape routes. If Dalton sends men, we make them pay for every foot of ground. Already started. Third, Pete took a long drag. You need to think about the kids. If shooting starts, where do they go? How do you keep them safe? That stopped Tom. He hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't considered what it would be like to defend this place with 4 children caught in the crossfire. Root cellar, he said finally, under the main house. Stone walls, thick door. They'll be safe there. For a while, but if the house burns, then we make sure the house doesn't burn. They stood in silence, smoking, thinking through scenarios and strategies and all the ways this could go wrong. Finally, Pete said, Tom, I got to ask, why her? Why now? You could have kept your head down, waited for Dalton to lose interest. Instead, you're taking in a woman with 4 kids and painting a target on your back. Why Palme? Tom thought about that, about the 2 years he'd spent here working the ranch, keeping to himself, living like a ghost, about the emptiness that had settled into his bones, the feeling that he was just marking time until death caught up with him. And then he thought about this past week, about Margaret standing in the creek holding that cow steady, about Samuel learning to brush horses with fierce concentration, about the sound of children's laughter, which he hadn't heard on this ranch since Elizabeth died. Because I was already dead, Tom said. Just didn't know it yet. And she reminded me what it's like to be alive. Pete nodded slowly. Well then, guess we better make sure you both stay that way. The next morning, Tom asked Margaret to walk with him. They left the children with Pete, who'd agreed to teach them how to collect eggs without getting pecked. Tom led Margaret up to the high pasture where you could see for miles in every direction. The mountains rose sharp and blue to the west. To the east, the plains rolled away toward Kansas, toward the life she'd fled. Pete came back from Denver last night, Tom said. Margaret's shoulders tensed. What did he find? That you told me the truth, about the shootout, about Richard working for Dalton, about everything. She let out a breath she'd been holding. You thought I was lying. I thought it was possible. Too much coincidence in you showing up here the same day Dalton's man came to warn me. But you helped me anyway. Had to know for sure first. Tom turned to face her. But now I do know, and it's worse than you think. Dalton's offering $500 for information about where you are. He's got people looking in every town between here and Kansas. Margaret closed her eyes. Then he'll find me eventually. Probably, unless we stop him first. How by turning you from a witness on the run into a witness under protection. By getting you to testify in front of a federal judge, putting Dalton away for conspiracy to murder. I can't. If I testify, Richard will kill my children. He said so. Richard's going to try to kill them anyway. The only difference is whether he succeeds. Tom kept his voice gentle but firm. Margaret, you got 2 choices. Run and hope Dalton never finds you, or fight and make sure he can't hurt you anymore. One slow death, the other's a chance at life. She walked to the edge of the pasture, looked out over the land. Wind moved through the grass like water-stirring patterns that appeared and vanished. I'm tired of running, she said quietly. Then we fight. You keep saying we, but this isn't your fight, Tom. It's mine. It became mine the day I brought you here. Besides, Dalton was coming for me anyway. This just gives me a reason to hit back. Margaret turned. Why are you doing this? Really, you don't owe me anything. Tom thought about Elizabeth, about the baby he'd lost with her, the future he'd buried in the cemetery outside town, about the 2 years of going through motions, existing but not living. Maybe I owe myself something, he said. A reason to care whether I wake up tomorrow. You and those kids, you gave me that. So yeah, I'm fighting, whether you like it or not. Margaret's eyes were bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. If we do this, some of us might die. Some of us are already dead. We're just still walking around. She smiled at that, small and sad, but real. All right, she said. We fight, together. Together, Tom agreed. But there's one more thing we need to do first. What's that? Get married. Margaret stared at him. What? Legal marriage. If you're my wife, Richard can't claim custody of the kids. And Dalton will know that coming after you means war with me. Tom, I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering. He stepped closer. This isn't about love or romance or any of that. It's strategy, protection, a legal shield that gives us time to figure out how to end this. But marriage, it's a piece of paper that says you and those kids are under my protection. That's all. He paused. Unless you want it to be more. But that's your choice, not mine. Margaret looked at him for a long moment, studying his face, looking for lies or hidden motives, or the kind of cruelty that said this was just another trap. She must have seen something different because she said, I'll marry you, Tom Mitchell, and I'll stand beside you when they come. Fair enough. They shook hands on it, formal and serious like signing a business contract. But Tom felt something shift in his chest, something that had been cold and dead, starting to warm back to life. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was just the knowledge that he wouldn't die alone. A week later, they stood in the small church in Ridgeway. Reverend Parker performed the ceremony with pursed lips and disapproving eyes. Sheriff Wade Cooper served as witness, along with Pete Garrison and Mrs. Catherine Henderson from the neighboring ranch. Margaret wore a dress Mrs. Henderson had loaned her, simple blue cotton that had seen better days. Tom wore his one good suit, the one he'd bought for Elizabeth's funeral and hadn't touched since. The children sat in the front pew. Samuel looked suspicious, like he was waiting for the catch. Benjamin seemed excited, whispering to Ruth about what it meant to have a new father. Ruth clutched a bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked that morning. Daniel sat on Samuel's lap, too young to understand but sensing the importance of the moment. Reverend Parker read through the ceremony with mechanical precision. When he got to the vows, Tom said, I do, and meant it more than he'd expected to. Margaret's voice was steady when she said the same. The kiss was brief and respectful. Her lips were warm. Tom felt his heart beat harder for just a moment, then settle back to its regular rhythm. They signed the papers. The Reverend filed them with the county clerk. In the eyes of the law, Margaret Warren was now Margaret Mitchell. Outside the church, people stared. Women whispered behind their hands. Men looked at Tom with expressions that ranged from pity to contempt. Tom didn't care. He helped Margaret into the truck, made sure the kids were settled in the back, and drove home. Home. The word felt different now. That evening, after the children were asleep in the bunkhouse, Margaret came to the main house. She stood in the doorway, uncertain. The Reverend said I should move my things to the main house, she said. Since we're married now. Tom nodded. There's a spare room upstairs. I already put fresh sheets on the bed. You don't expect me to? I told you, this is protection, not obligation. You'll have your own room, your own space. What happens beyond that is your choice. Margaret stepped inside, looked around at the kitchen, where Elizabeth's touch still lingered in the arrangement of dishes, the curtains on the windows, the way the chairs sat around the table. She died here, Margaret said. Not a question. Upstairs, giving birth. Baby didn't make it either. Tom's voice was flat, the way it always was when he talked about it. That was 5 years ago. Haven't changed much since. Do you want me to change things? Tom considered. Do what feels right. It's your house now, too. Margaret nodded slowly, ran her hand along the kitchen counter, feeling the worn wood. I'll try not to erase her. I'd appreciate that. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Tom said, I'm going to check the perimeter before bed, lock the door behind me. He walked out into the night, rifle in hand, and made his circuit of the ranch. Everything was quiet. Stars overhead, mountains dark against the sky, cattle settled in the pasture. But Tom felt it coming. The stillness before the storm, the way the air gets heavy before lightning strikes. Dalton was out there, planning, waiting, choosing his moment. Tom finished his check, went back inside. Margaret had gone upstairs to her room. A line of light showed under her door. Tom went to his own room, set the rifle beside the bed, and lay down fully clothed. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it was thin and restless. 2 weeks passed. The ranch settled into its new normal. Margaret moved her things into the main house but kept a careful distance. They worked together during the day, ate meals with the children, then separated at night to their respective rooms. Samuel started calling Tom Sir less and Tom more. Benjamin followed Tom everywhere, eager to learn, desperate for a father figure. Ruth showed Margaret where the wild strawberries grew, and they picked them together, making jam that filled the house with sweet smell. Daniel took his first steps in the main house kitchen, from Margaret to Tom, and back again, squealing with delight. It almost felt like a real family, almost felt like peace alone. Then Richard Warren came. It was late afternoon, the sun starting its slide toward the mountains. Tom was repairing fence line near the road when he saw the car. Same black sedan from before, but different driver. Tom set down his tools, walked to where he'd left his rifle leaning against a post, picked it up, worked the lever chambering around. The car stopped. The door opened. Richard Warren stepped out. He was younger than Tom expected. Maybe 35, tall and lean with the kind of hardness that came from doing violence for a living. He wore a suit that fit too well for ranch country, and his boots had city shine. But it was his eyes that told the real story. Cold, flat, empty. The eyes of a man who'd killed before and would again without losing sleep. "You must be Mitchell," Richard said, "and you must be trespassing." Richard smiled, no warmth in it. "I'm here for my wife and kids. I'll be taking them now." "Mrs. Mitchell isn't going anywhere." "Mrs. Mitchell," Richard's smile widened. "So it's true. You married her. Quick work. What's it been, 2 weeks? 3, and it's legal, which means you got no claim on her or the children." "That's where you're wrong, cowboy. Those kids are mine. Blood makes them mine, and blood beats a piece of paper every time." Tom raised the rifle, not aiming directly at Richard, but the message was clear. "I'm going to say this once. Get back in your car and leave. Don't come back." Richard looked at the rifle, then at Tom. His expression didn't change. "You know who I work for?" "Frank Dalton." "Yeah, I know." "Then you know what's coming. You can't stop it. Nobody can. Dalton gets what he wants, and he wants Maggie dead before she can testify. She's under my protection now. Dalton wants her, he'll have to go through me." "That can be arranged." Movement behind Richard. Margaret stepped out from the barn, shotgun in her hands. She must have heard the car come to see who it was. Richard turned and saw her. Something flickered in his eyes. Not love. Possession. "Maggie, you're looking thin. Kid's all right." "Stay away from us, Richard." "Can't do that, darling. See, I got orders. Mr. Dalton wants to talk to you about what you saw last December. Very important conversation. Life and death, you might say." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Then I'll have to insist." Richard's hand moved toward his jacket. Tom saw it coming, shouted a warning, brought the rifle up. But Margaret was faster. The shotgun roared buckshot, tearing up dirt 5 feet in front of Richard. The blast echoed off the mountains. Richard froze, hands away from his body. "Next one's center mass," Margaret said. Her voice was steady. The shotgun didn't waver. Richard looked at her with something like respect. "You've changed, Maggie. You made me change. Now leave." Richard backed toward his car, hands still visible. "This isn't over. Dalton's coming. When he does, all the guns in Colorado won't save you." He got in the car, started the engine. Before driving away, he leaned out the window. 2 weeks, Maggie. That's how long Dalton says you got to come in voluntarily. After that, he sends people who won't be as polite as me." The car pulled away, dust rising in its wake. Tom lowered his rifle, walked over to Margaret. She was shaking now, the shotgun dipping as adrenaline drained away. "You did good," Tom said quietly. "I almost killed him. Would have saved us trouble if you had." She looked at him, shocked. "I'm not saying you should have," Tom clarified. "Just that it would have been simpler. But you made the right call. Dead man brings more questions than live one." Margaret handed him the shotgun. "He meant it, about Dalton coming." "I know. What do we do?" Tom looked down the road where dust still hung in the air. "We prepare, and we call in reinforcements." That night, Tom sent word to every man he'd ever trusted. Pete Garrison spread the message to old deputies, retired marshals, men who remembered what it was like to stand on the right side of the law. 3 days later, they started arriving. First came Jack Sullivan, 58, former Texas Ranger, with hands like iron and a face carved from old leather. He rode in on a paint horse, saddlebags full of ammunition. Then Charlie Dawes, 61, who'd been a deputy marshal in Oklahoma Territory before it became a state. He brought 2 rifles and a pistol that had belonged to his grandfather. Finally came Robert Hayes, 65, the oldest of them, but still steady, with a gun. He'd been a marshal in Kansas, worked with Tom, back when they were both younger and more certain the law meant something. They gathered in Tom's barn, these old men who'd spent their lives fighting for a system that had let them down more often than not. Tom laid it out plain. Frank Dalton's sending men to kill Margaret Mitchell, and probably me with her. I'm asking you to help me stop him. How many men? Jack asked. Don't know. Could be fam, could be 20. And you want the four of us to hold them off. Plus Pete. And Margaret can shoot. Robert laughed short and harsh. 6 people against Dalton's gang. Tom, I like long odds, but that's suicide. Maybe, but I'm doing it regardless. Question is whether you're in or out. The 3 men looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them, the kind that came from decades of shared experience. Charlie spoke first. I'm in. Got nothing better to do than die for a good cause. Jack nodded. Same. Besides, I never liked Dalton. Killed a friend of mine back in '38. Robert sighed. Hell, in for a penny, in for a pound. Let's fortify this place and see if we can make Dalton regret coming after us. They spent the next week turning the ranch into a fortress, strung barbed wire around the perimeter, cut sight lines through the scrub, stored water and ammunition in strategic locations, built firing positions in the barn loft and the main house. Margaret watched all this with growing fear. She saw these old men preparing to die and knew it was because of her. On the 6th night, she found Tom on the porch. The others were asleep, exhausted from the day's work. They're going to die because of me, she said. They might die defending what's right. That's different. Is it? They'll still be dead? Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he said, these men have been waiting their whole lives for something worth dying for. Every marshal I know, every lawman who lived long enough to get old, we all feel the same thing. Like we survived when we should have died, and now we owe a debt. To who? To the ones who didn't make it, the good men who fell doing their duty. Tom looked out at the darkness. This is how we pay it back. By standing one more time. By proving that the law still means something even when the courts fail. But what if we lose? Then we lose. But at least we'll go down fighting. That's more than most people get. Margaret sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. I don't want you to die, Tom. I don't plan on it. Got too much to live for now. She turned to look at him. In the lamplight from the window, his face was half shadow, half gold. Do you regret marrying me? Tom considered the question seriously. Thought about the complications she'd brought, the danger, the certainty that violence was coming. No, he said finally. I regret a lot of things in my life, but this isn't one of them. Margaret leaned her head against his shoulder. Just for a moment. Then she stood, went inside, left Tom alone with his thoughts and his rifle and the night pressing close. The 2 weeks passed. Dalton's deadline came and went. Nothing happened. Another week, still nothing. The men started to get restless. Jack and Charlie argued about whether Dalton was bluffing. Robert cleaned his guns obsessively, like activity could ward off the waiting. Tom knew better. Dalton wasn't bluffing, he was planning. Choosing his moment. Waiting for them to relax to let their guard down. It came on a Thursday night, no moon clouds covering the stars. The kind of darkness that swallowed everything. Tom woke to the sound of dogs barking. Not the normal barking at coyotes or deer. This was frantic, terrified. He was out of bed with his rifle in his hands before he was fully awake. Ran to the window, looked out. Riders, 7 of them circling the ranch torches in their hands. Tom ran downstairs, shouted to wake the others. They're here, positions. Pete and the old marshals stumbled from their rooms, grabbing weapons. Tom ran to the back bedroom where Margaret slept with the children. Get the kids to the root cellar. Now, Margaret didn't argue. Woke the children, herded them downstairs. Samuel carried Daniel, wide-eyed and crying. Benjamin held Ruth's hand. Tom led them to the root cellar, a stone-walled space under the kitchen with a heavy wooden door. Inside were blankets, water, food, enough to last days if needed. Stay here, Tom ordered, no matter what you hear. Don't open this door unless you hear my voice or Pete's. Understand? Samuel nodded, trying to be brave. Margaret's face was white with fear, but she pulled the children close. Tom, she said. He looked at her. Don't die. Working on it. He closed the door, threw the bolt, ran back upstairs. The first shots were already being fired. Glass shattered as bullets punched through the windows. Tom hit the floor, crawled to the front window, rose just enough to see out. The riders had dismounted, taking cover behind the water trough. The fence posts. Professional. They knew what they were doing. One of them shouted across the yard, "Mitchell, send out the woman and we leave you alone." Tom didn't answer, just found his target and fired. The Winchester kicked against his shoulder. One of the torches fell, man behind it stumbling back into darkness. Pete was at the side window, his old Remington barking steadily. Jack Sullivan had taken position in the upstairs bedroom, his rifle cracking with measured precision. Charlie and Robert were in the barn, protected by thick walls and good sight lines. The attackers returned fire. Bullets thudded into wood, whined off stone. A lamp exploded, oil spreading across the floor. Tom stamped it out before flames could catch. He counted shots, tried to figure out how many men they were facing. 5 riders, maybe 6. But were there more waiting in the darkness? A bottle arced through the air, trailing fire. Molotov cocktail. It hit the barn roof, burst into flame. The dry wood caught fast. Tom swore the horses were in there, and Charlie and Robert. He ran for the back door, rifle in one hand. Pete shouted after him, but Tom was already moving, sprinting across the open ground between house and barn. Bullets kicked up dirt at his feet. Something hot grazed his left shoulder, spinning him halfway around. He kept running. The barn doors were already open. Charlie was leading horses out, Robert covering him with a shotgun. Smoke poured from the loft where hay had caught fire. "Get them clear," Tom shouted. Another shot. This one hit Tom high on the shoulder, punched through muscle and out the back. He went down hard, tasted dirt and blood. Footsteps, someone running toward him. Tom rolled, brought up his rifle, but his left arm wasn't working right. The gun wavered. Then Margaret was there. Where the hell had she come from? She was supposed to be in the cellar with the children. But here she was, shotgun in her hand, standing over him like an avenging angel. She fired both barrels. Tom saw a shadow fall, heard a man scream. Margaret dropped the empty shotgun, grabbed Tom under his good arm, hauled him toward cover. For a woman who'd been half-starved 3 weeks ago, she had surprising strength. They made it behind the water trough. Tom pressed his back against the wood, breathing hard. His shoulder was on fire, blood soaking his shirt. "You're shot," Margaret said. Her hands were already on him, checking the wound. "Notice that. What are you doing out here, the children?" "Samuel's with them. He's braver than you think." She tore a strip from her dress, wadded it against the wound. "This is going to hurt." She pushed hard. Tom's vision went white with pain, but the bleeding slowed. Pete appeared beside them, face grim. 2 down, maybe 3 more out there. "But Tom, the barn's going up fast." Tom looked. Flames were eating through the roof now, spreading down the walls. The horses were clear, but everything else was going to burn. A voice called from the darkness, different from before, older with authority behind it. "Mitchell, I know you can hear me." Tom's blood went cold. He knew that voice. "That's Frank Dalton," Pete whispered. Tom managed to sit up despite Margaret trying to push him back down. He called out, "Dalton, come to finish the job yourself." Laughter echoed across the yard. Had to see it with my own eyes. The great Tom Mitchell, hiding behind a woman's skirts. How the mighty have fallen. Says the man who couldn't stay in prison for 2 years. Money talks louder than Justice Mitchell. You should know that by now. A pause. But I'm not here for philosophy. I'm here for the woman. Margaret Warren. Send her out and I'll let you live. Hell, I'll even let you keep the ranch. All I want is her. Tom looked at Margaret. She met his eyes, jaw set. "Don't even think about it," she said. Tom called back. "She's not going anywhere, Dalton." "Then you're all going to burn. Your choice, BM." Gunfire erupted again, concentrated and vicious. The attackers had regrouped, were pressing hard now. Tom counted shots. His ammunition was running low. Pete's too, judging by the way he was rationing his fire. From the barn, Robert's shotgun roared. Then silence. "Robert's hit," Charlie shouted. Tom tried to stand. His shoulder gave out, dumped him back against the trough. Margaret grabbed the rifle from his hands. "Stay down." "Margaret." But she was already moving, running low toward the barn. Bullets chased her, but she was fast zigzagging, making herself a hard target. She made it to the barn, door disappeared inside. Tom's heart hammered. He tried to reload with one hand, fumbling shells, dropping half of them. Pete took the rifle from him. "Let me, you're bleeding too much." "We're losing." Not yet, we're not. Jack Sullivan appeared sliding down from the house on the porch roof. His face was streaked with soot and blood. They're flanking us. 2 men working around the east side. If they get behind us, we're finished. Tom forced himself to think through the pain. The creek bed, they'll use it for cover. Can't get there from here. Too much open ground. Tom looked at the barn. Flames were climbing higher now, turning night into hellish orange day. If the fire spread to the house, to the root cellar where the children were hiding, he made a decision. The kind that got people killed, but it was all he had left. Pete, Jack, hold this position. Keep them pinned down. I'm going for the creek. Tom, you can't even stand. Then I'll crawl. He rolled out from behind the trough, started low crawling toward the creek. Every movement sent lightning through his shoulder. He left a blood trail in the dirt. 50 feet, 40. Someone saw him, shouted. Bullets chewed up the ground around him. 30 feet, 20. He fell into the creek bed, rolled onto his back, gasping. The water here was barely a trickle, but the banks were deep enough for cover, and Tom worked his way downstream toward where he thought the flankers would be. His vision was going gray at the edges. Blood loss. He was running out of time. There. 2 shadows moving along the creek bank. They hadn't seen him yet. Tom brought up his pistol. The Colt felt like it weighed 100 pounds. He steadied it against a rock, aimed at the first shadow. Squeezed the trigger. The gun bucked. The shadow fell. The second man spun, fired wildly. Tom shot him twice. He went down into the creek water, running red. Tom lay there, breathing hard, tasting copper. He'd stopped them. But at what cost? Footsteps splashing through water. Tom tried to raise the pistol again, but his arm wouldn't respond. A hand grabbed his collar, hauled him up. He found himself staring into Charlie Dawes' weathered face. Thought you could use some help, Charlie said. Together they made their way back to the house. The battle had died down. The attackers were pulling back, dragging their wounded with them. In the barn doorway, Tom saw Margaret and Robert. The old marshal was clutching his leg, blood between his fingers, but he was alive. Margaret had her arm around him, supporting his weight. Pete ran to meet them, helped Charlie get Tom into the house. They laid him on the kitchen table. The wound in his shoulder was still bleeding, but slower now. Margaret came in, face smudged with soot, dress torn and bloody. She went to work on Tom's shoulder without asking, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made him bite back a scream. Bullet went through clean, she said. You're lucky. Don't feel lucky. You're alive. That's luck enough. She bandaged him with strips of clean cloth, her hands steady despite everything. When she was done, she sat back looking at him. Don't ever do that again. Do what? Run into gunfire like you're invincible. You're not. You're just a man, Tom Mitchell. A man who can die just as easy as anyone else. Tom managed a weak smile. Noted. Pete came in, his face grim. We held them off, for now, but Dalton's still out there, and we lost the barn. They all looked through the door. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the stars. Years of work gone in minutes. But the house stood, and the children were safe. Tom pushed himself into a sitting position, ignoring Margaret's protests. How many of them did we get? 3 confirmed dead, maybe 2 wounded. Pete reloaded his rifle with practiced movements. But Dalton got away. Him and at least 2 others. Then this isn't over. No, they'll regroup, come back with more men. Tom slid off the table, testing his legs. They held. Barely. Then we don't wait for them. We take the fight to Dalton. Tom, you can barely stand, Margaret said. I can stand well enough. And I'm done playing defense. Sheriff Wade Cooper arrived at dawn, brought by the sound of gunfire and the glow of flames visible from town. He took one look at the burned barn, the blood-stained yard, the 3 bodies lying covered with blankets, and his face went hard. Tom, what happened here? Tom sat on the porch steps, his wounded shoulder bandaged and aching. Frank Dalton sent men to kill Margaret and me. We defended ourselves. 3 dead men is more than self-defense. They came onto my property, threw firebombs, shot first. Tom gestured at his shoulder. I got the wounds to prove it. Sheriff Cooper examined the scene. The bullet holes in the house, the burned barn, the evidence of a small war. This is beyond my jurisdiction, he said finally. I'm calling in the federal marshals. Good, do it. And while you're at it, tell them Frank Dalton is operating a criminal enterprise out of Kansas. Tell them I got a witness who can testify to murder conspiracy and enough other charges to put Dalton away for life. The sheriff looked at Margaret, who stood in the doorway holding Daniel. Mrs. Mitchell, is this true? Yes, sir. I saw Richard Warren, my first husband, murder 2 men last December. I heard them talking about Frank Dalton, about shipments and money and plans. I can identify everyone who was there. Sheriff Cooper nodded slowly. All right, I'll make the calls. But Tom, you need to understand something. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Dalton's not going to stop. I'm counting on it. The sheriff left. Tom watched him go, then turned to Pete. How's Robert? Leg wound, bad but not fatal. Charlie's with him now. And our ammunition, low. We used most of it last night. Tom nodded, thinking, planning. Margaret came out, sat beside him. What are you going to do? Wait for the marshals. Get you and the kids somewhere safe. Then hunt Dalton down and end this. You can't do that alone. Won't be alone. Pete's with me, and I got friends who owe me favors. Tom. Margaret put her hand on his. Promise me something. What? That you won't throw your life away for revenge. That you'll fight smart, not angry. Tom looked at her hand on his. Small, calloused, strong. I promise, he said. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about making sure you and those kids can live without looking over your shoulders. 3 days later, the federal marshals arrived. 2 of them young and serious in their dark suits. They took Margaret's statement, examined the evidence, photographed everything. Then they arrested Pete. Tom was in the house when he heard the commotion. He ran outside, saw Pete in handcuffs being led toward the marshal's car. What the hell is this? The taller marshal turned. Pete Garrison is wanted for questioning in connection with the deaths of 3 men on this property. They attacked us. That's for a court to decide. Mr. Garrison is coming with us. Tom stepped forward. The marshal's hand went to his gun. Tom, don't, Pete said quietly. Let them do their job. This is Dalton's doing. He's got connections. He's using the law against us. Pete smiled sad and yeah, he's good at that. But Tom, listen, you got to keep Margaret safe. That's what matters. I can handle myself. They put Pete in the car, drove away, leaving Tom standing in the yard with impotent rage burning in his chest. Margaret came out, saw his face. What happened? They took Pete, charged him with murder. Can they do that? Dalton can do whatever he wants. He's got money, lawyers, judges in his pocket. Tom slammed his fist against the porch railing. We defend ourselves and we get arrested for it. Then what do we do? Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, we go legal. On all the way? We get you in front of a judge on the record testifying about what you saw. We make it impossible for Dalton to make this go away. And Richard's going to be a problem. But one problem at a time. That problem arrived 2 weeks later in the form of legal papers delivered by the sheriff. Richard Warren was filing for custody of his children. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out at the county courthouse. Tom read the papers with growing fury. Richard's lawyer had painted Margaret as an unfit mother who'd exposed her children to violence, who'd married a stranger within days of arrival, who was living in a household that had recently been the site of a shootout. All technically true. All damning. He's going to win, Margaret said. Her voice was hollow. He's going to take my children. No, Tom folded the papers. He's not. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win. Now look at what happened here. Look at the evidence. Any judge will see I put my children in danger. Any judge will also see that you were running from a man who threatened to kill you. That you did what you had to do to survive. Tom stood, paced the kitchen. We need a lawyer, a good one. They hired Harrison Caldwell, a 60-year-old former prosecutor who'd retired to Ridgeway after a career in Denver. He had a reputation for being tough, smart, and honest. Caldwell reviewed the case, his face grave. This is going to be difficult, he said. Richard Warren's lawyer is going to argue that your household is dangerous, unstable, and unfit for children. The recent attack supports that argument. What about the fact that Richard works for Frank Dalton? Tom asked. That he's a criminal. Can you prove it? Tom hesitated. Pete Garrison went to Denver, got evidence. But Pete's in jail now. Then we need to get that evidence. Without it, it's your word against Richard's. Caldwell leaned back in his chair. I'll be honest with you. The odds aren't good. Courts favor fathers in custody disputes, especially when the mother has remarried so quickly and under such unusual circumstances. So we're going to lose. I didn't say that. I said the odds are not good. But we've got one advantage. What's that? The truth. And if we can get it in front of the right judge, truth still matters. The 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Tom and Margaret met with Caldwell, daily going over testimony, preparing for questions, building their case. The children knew something was wrong. Samuel became withdrawn, protective. Benjamin clung to Margaret. Ruth had nightmares. Daniel, too young to understand, sensed the tension and cried more than usual. Margaret held them close, read to them, sang them songs their grandmother had taught her. And every night she prayed to a God she wasn't sure was listening. The day of the hearing arrived gray and cold. Tom drove Margaret to the courthouse, the children in the back of the truck. Caldwell met them on the steps. "Remember," he said to Margaret, "tell the truth. Don't let them provoke you. And no matter what Richard or his lawyer says, keep your composure." Inside, the courtroom was packed. Small towns love drama, and this was the best show in months. Richard sat with his lawyer, a slick man named Sutton, who wore an expensive suit and a smile that never reached his eyes. Richard looked different, cleaner, softer. He'd shaved, cut his hair, bought new clothes, playing the part of the concerned father. Judge Martha Whitmore entered. She was 55, gray-haired, with the face that showed every hard decision she'd ever made. She had a reputation for being fair but strict. The hearing began. Sutton presented Richard's case first, painted him as a devoted father who'd made mistakes but had reformed. He had a steady job now with Union Pacific Railroad. He'd remarried, had a stable home in Topeka. He was ready to provide for his children. Then Sutton turned his attention to Margaret. "Mrs. Mitchell, isn't it true that you left your husband without warning or explanation?" "I left to protect my children." "From what?" "From him." "Can you prove your husband ever harmed you or the children?" Margaret's hands clenched in her lap. "He threatened to kill us." "But did he ever actually harm you physically?" "No, but..." "So you fled based on a perceived threat, taking Mr. Warren's children across state lines without his permission?" "They're my children too." "And yet you exposed them to actual violence at Mr. Mitchell's ranch, didn't you? There was a shootout. People died. The barn burned. Your children were hiding in a cellar while bullets flew overhead." "I was protecting them." "You were endangering them, Mrs. Mitchell. Admit it." Caldwell objected. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. Then it was Caldwell's turn to question Margaret. He kept it simple, letting her tell her story. She spoke about Richard's late nights, the strange men who came to the house, the violence she sensed building. About the night she saw the murders in the garage, heard Dalton's name, knew she had to run. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Caldwell asked. "Because I didn't know who to trust. Richard said he had friends in the department. I was afraid they'd take my children, or worse." "So you ran to protect them?" "Yes." "And when you arrived in Ridgeway, what happened?" "I couldn't find work. No one would hire a woman with 4 children. We were out of money, out of options." Her voice broke slightly. "I thought I'd have to give them up, put them in an orphanage. Then Mr. Mitchell offered me a job." "And later married you?" "Yes." "Why did you marry him?" Margaret looked at Tom sitting in the gallery. "Because he was the first person who asked what I could do instead of what I'd done wrong. Because he treated my children with kindness. Because he fought to protect us when no one else would." "Do you love him?" The courtroom went silent. Margaret met Tom's eyes. "Yes, I do." It was the first time either of them had said it out loud. Sutton cross-examined her, trying to poke holes in her story, but Margaret held firm. She didn't waver, didn't break. Then Richard took the stand. He was good, convincing, played the role of the repentant husband perfectly. Admitted he'd been distant, focused too much on work, neglected his family. But he'd changed now. He just wanted his children back. Caldwell's cross-examination was brutal. "Mr. Warren, you work for Union Pacific Railroad." "Yes." "Doing what exactly?" "Track maintenance and inspection." "That's interesting, because I have employment records here that show you barely logged 40 hours in the last 6 months. Hard to maintain tracks when you're never there." Richard shifted. "I had other duties." "What kind of duties?" "Security work." "Security for whom?" various clients, including Frank Dalton. The courtroom erupted. Judge Whitmore hammered her gavel. Richard's face went red. I don't know anyone named Frank Dalton. Caldwell pulled out a document. This is a bank statement showing a wire transfer of $500 from Dalton Enterprises to your account 2 days before the attack on the Mitchell Ranch. Can you explain that? That was payment for legitimate work. What kind of work? I don't remember. You don't remember earning $500? That's half a year's salary for most people. Sutton objected. The judge allowed the question to stand. Richard had no good answer. Caldwell pressed harder. Mr. Warren, did you hire men to attack the Mitchell Ranch? No. Did you know the men who died there? I've never seen them before. That's strange because one of them, a man named Kane, received a payment from you 1 week before the attack. Same amount. $500. Richard stood up. This is ridiculous. I'm the victim here. My wife stole my children. Your wife fled with her children to escape a man who works for a criminal organization. A man who murders people for money. The courtroom exploded again. Judge Whitmore called for order, threatened to clear the room. But before she could continue, the rear doors of the courtroom burst open. Sheriff Cooper strode in, followed by 2 federal marshals. And between them in handcuffs was Frank Dalton himself. The courtroom fell silent. Dalton looked older than Tom remembered. Prison had aged him, or maybe it was just seeing him in daylight instead of shadow. But his eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, dangerous. Sheriff Cooper approached the bench. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but I have information relevant to this case. Judge Whitmore's eyebrows rose. Proceed. We arrested Frank Dalton this morning on federal charges of conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and interstate smuggling. When we searched him, we found correspondence between him and Richard Warren detailing plans to kill Margaret Mitchell and anyone protecting her. He handed a folder to the judge. She read it, her expression darkening. These letters explicitly describe the attack on the Mitchell Ranch. They name Richard Warren as the organizer. They include payment schedules and target information. Richard went white, tried to stand to run. The marshals grabbed him. Judge Whitmore looked from the letters to Richard to Dalton. Mr. Warren, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. Bailiff, take him into custody. Richard struggled. You don't understand. Dalton will kill me if I don't. If you don't what? Caldwell asked quietly. If I don't finish the job. Kill Maggie before she can testify. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Judge Whitmore set down her gavel with deliberate care. I've heard enough. Primary custody of Samuel Benjamin Ruth and Daniel Warren is awarded to Margaret Mitchell. Richard Warren's parental rights are hereby terminated, pending resolution of criminal charges against him. Margaret collapsed forward, hands covering her face, crying but from relief this time. Tom stood, walked to the railing that separated the gallery from the court, reached over, put his hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, tears streaming. We won, she whispered. We won. Tom agreed. Outside the courthouse, the crowd gathered to watch as marshals led both Dalton and Richard to waiting cars. Dalton caught Tom's eye as he was pushed into the vehicle. This isn't over, Mitchell, he called. Yeah, Tom said. It is. The cars drove away. Tom turned to find Margaret and the children. Samuel ran to him first, wrapped his arms around Tom's waist. Pa, the boy said. Just that. But it meant everything. Benjamin and Ruth joined the hug. Daniel, held by Margaret, reached out his little hands toward Tom. Tom gathered them all close, these children who weren't his by blood, but were his in every other way that mattered. Margaret stood slightly apart watching. Tom extended his hand to her. She took it. The weeks that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned instead of imposed. Jack Sullivan stayed through the summer, helped with the new barn, then rode back to Texas with a promise to visit. He died peacefully in 1955, surrounded by grandchildren. Charlie Dawes and Robert Hayes settled in Ridgeway, became fixtures at the local saloon, telling stories about the old days to anyone who'd listen. They were buried side by side in the town cemetery, their headstones reading, Friends to the End. Pete Garrison was released from jail 3 days after the trial. All charges dropped. The federal marshals who'd arrested him admitted they had acted on false information supplied by Dalton's lawyers. Pete didn't hold a grudge. He came back to the ranch, took one look at the burned barn, and started drawing plans for a new one. Margaret planted a garden. Vegetables, flowers, things that would grow and bloom and feed them through the winter. The children adapted. Samuel worked with Tom every day, learning the ranch, becoming the man he'd been forced to be too early. Benjamin and Ruth went to school in town, made friends, started laughing more. Daniel grew learned to walk properly, to talk in sentences that almost made sense. One evening in October, 6 months after the trial, Tom and Margaret sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Margaret had news, had been trying to find the right moment to share it. "Tom," she said. He looked at her. "I'm pregnant." Tom froze, stared at her. "You're sure?" "Doctor confirmed it yesterday, about 3 months along, due in the spring." Tom stood, pulled her up, wrapped his arms around her carefully, like she was made of glass. "A baby," he said. His voice was rough with emotion. "Our baby." He kissed her then. Not the brief, respectful kiss from their wedding, but something deeper. Something that acknowledged all they'd been through, all they'd survived, all they'd become to each other. When they pulled apart, Margaret was smiling. "Are you happy?" she asked. Tom looked out at the ranch, at the new barn rising from the ashes of the old, at the children playing in the yard, at this woman who'd walked into his life carrying nothing but determination and 4 scared kids and changed everything. "Yeah," he said, "I'm happy." The baby came in May 1943, a girl born just after dawn with a cry that could wake the dead and a grip that could bend steel. They named her Grace. For the grace they'd been shown, the grace that had brought them together, the grace that let them survive when they shouldn't have. Tom held her with shaking hands, this tiny person who was half him and half Margaret, all possibility and hope. Samuel peered over his shoulder. "She's so small." "You were that small once." "Really, really." Benjamin wanted to hold her. Ruth wanted to sing to her. Daniel just stared, fascinated by this new creature who was somehow his sister. Margaret watched from the bed, exhausted but glowing. Mrs. Henderson had helped with the birth, and now she tidied up, giving the family space. "She looks like you," Margaret said to Tom. "She looks like trouble," Tom replied. But he was smiling. That summer they held a barn raising. The whole community came. Even the people who'd whispered about Margaret when she first arrived, who judged Tom for taking her in, showed up with hammers and nails and covered dishes. By sunset, the new barn stood complete. Bigger than the old one, stronger, built to last. They had a dance that night. Someone brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar. Music filled the air as couples spun under the stars. Tom danced with Margaret Grace asleep against her shoulder. They moved slowly, barely swaying, but it was enough. "You ever think about that first day?" Margaret asked. "When I got in your truck, not knowing who you were or where you were going?" "Sometimes." "You think you'd do it again, knowing what you know now?" Tom looked at her, at the life they'd built from nothing, at the children who called him Pa, at the baby sleeping peacefully between them. "In a heartbeat," he said. The years passed. Grace grew into a wild thing, fearless and fierce. She learned to ride before she could read, could rope a fence post by age 5, could outshoot her brothers by 7. Samuel became the man Tom had hoped he would. Strong, honorable, dedicated to the land and the family. He took over more of the ranch work as Tom got older, learning not just the mechanics but the philosophy. The idea that the land was something you stewarded, not owned. Benjamin went to college, came back with a degree in veterinary medicine, set up practice in Ridgeway. Married a teacher, had 3 kids of his own. Ruth became a writer, moved to Denver, published books about the West that people actually read. She never forgot where she came from, came home every Christmas with stories and gifts. Daniel, the baby who'd been too young to remember the running and the fear, grew up knowing only safety and love. He became a teacher like his sister-in-law. Taught at the school in Ridgeway, shaped young minds with patience and kindness. Frank Dalton died in prison in 1950, stabbed by another inmate over a gambling debt. Tom felt nothing when he heard the news. The man had been dead to him for years. Richard Warren was released in 1955, his sentence reduced for cooperation. He never contacted the children. Died alone in a boarding house in Kansas City 2 years later. The kids didn't attend the funeral. Tom and Margaret ran the ranch until 1965, when age and arthritis finally convinced them to hand it over to Samuel and his family. They moved to a smaller house on the property, spent their days watching grandchildren play in the same yard where they'd first made their stand. On a cold evening in January 1978, Tom and Margaret sat on the porch of their little house. He was 75 now, white-haired and stooped. She was 66, still strong but moving slower. Grace's youngest, a boy of 6, was chasing chickens in the yard. Samuel's oldest daughter was mucking stalls in the barn. The sounds of family, of life continuing. Margaret leaned against Tom's shoulder. "You ever regret it, marrying me?" Tom thought about that, about all the years, the struggles, the triumphs, about the children raised and the grandchildren growing, about the life they'd built from nothing but determination and hope. "Not once," he said. "Not even when I'm ornery. Especially not then." She laughed. The sound was the same as it had been 30 years ago when she'd first let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be happy. "I love you, Tom Mitchell." "I love you too, Margaret Mitchell." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. The same mountains that had watched them fight for their lives, watched them build their family, watched them grow old together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were always new challenges, but they'd face them together the way they'd faced everything for the last quarter century. The boy in the yard caught a chicken, held it up triumphantly. Samuel called to him to be gentle. The chicken squawked indignantly. Margaret chuckled. "Reminds me of Benjamin at that age." "Everything reminds you of one of the kids." "Is that so bad?" "No," Tom admitted. "No, it's not." The last light faded from the sky. Stars emerged, bright and cold and eternal. Inside the house, warmth waited. Food on the table, beds made up, grandchildren ready to demand stories before sleep. Tom stood, offered his hand to Margaret. She took it, let him help her up. Her arthritis was bad tonight, but she didn't complain. They walked inside together, closing the door on the cold. And in that moment, everything they'd fought for, everything they'd built, everything they'd survived to reach this point, it all came down to this: a home, a family, a life worth living. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything.